No, that'd be an excellent idea for a meeting. Well, why don't we get started? We've got a couple of new folks here. Hopefully Patrick will come back on, but why don't we can go ahead and do a round of introductions. But I'm Christopher Riley with Sweet Birch Consulting in the University of Rhode Island. And I'm the co-coordinator of the Rhode Island Woodland Partnership with Kate, and I'll hand it over to you.
Hi, Kate Sales, co-coordinator of the Rhode Island Woodland Partnership and Ag and Forestry Program Manager for Northern District.
Right, we'll just go around the screen. How about Alana?
Hey everyone, Alana Russell. I am the University of Rhode Island Biocontrol Lab Manager, and I'm also the state coordinator for the State Partnership Committee of the Forest Ecosystem Monitoring Cooperative.
Paul?
Paul Dolan with the Rhode Island Resource Conservation Development Council.
Let's go over to Mark.
Hi, I'm Mark Tremblay, a consulting forester, but also the outreach coordinator with RIFCO is my other hat.
Thanks. How about you, Scott?
I'm Scott Millar with Grow Smart Rhode Island.
Over to Ken.
Hey, Ken Ayers, Chief of the Divisions of Agriculture and Forest Environment.
Thanks. And Cindy?
Cindy Kwolek. I'm the CAPS coordinator for the Pest Program for Division of Agriculture, DEM.
Thanks. TJ?
Everybody, nice to meet you, Patrick. I'm TJ Boudreau. I'm the Deputy Chief of the Division of Forest Environment at DEM.
Patrick?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Pat Langloy. I'm a first-year MESM student at URI, and like Kate said, the new environmental field technician for the Southern Rhode Island Conservation District. So it's great to meet you all.
Happy to be here. And Molly, good to have you with us today.
Haven't been able to make it to these meetings in a while, so good to see everyone. I'm Molly Henry. I'm the Senior Manager of Climate and Health with American Forest, and I guess sometimes considered a DEM contractor for the Division of Forest Environment.
Great. Go over to Lou.
Hey, I'm Lou Allard. I'm the Urban and Community Forestry Program Coordinator with the Division of Forest Environment.
And David.
I'm David Gregg. I'm the director of the Rhode Island Natural History Survey.
On to Amanda.
Hi, Amanda Freitas. I'm the Rhode Island Wildlife Action Plan Community Liaison. That's a group project between the Division of Fish and Wildlife at DEM and the Rhode Island Natural History Survey. So I am a contract worker.
And finally, we have got Fern.
I'm Fern Graves. I am the Forest Stewardship Program Coordinator with Division of Forest Environment.
Thanks. Well, we've got a good group, and we are going to be able to learn more about the spotted lanternfly and what it means for Rhode Island's forests, which is a presentation that Cindy and Alana are going to give, and we can kick off our meeting with that as the focal topic, but I know a lot of us have been looking forward to getting more up to speed on what's going on with the lanternfly, and this is our opportunity. You guys can take it away.
Thanks, Chris. Alana, do you want me to start introductions?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, everybody. As you know, I'm Cynthia Kwolek. I work with DEM, Division of Agriculture, with the CAPS State Survey Monitoring Program. And I also have Alana here today, and we're both going to be talking about spotted lanternfly. And before I jump into that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the CAPS program and the funding that we have to do outreach. And Alana is going to talk about more of the science part of spotted lanternfly. And I know a few of you have already seen this presentation, but we kind of mixed it up a little bit. So hopefully it'll be a little bit more entertaining today than having to watch the same presentation again. So a little bit of our program overview. The CAPS program. CAPS is Cooperative Agricultural Pest Survey program. We monitor for plant pests, and those are of environmental and economic concern. So things that we don't have here that we are kind of monitoring to make sure that we continue not to have them here. So it's a cooperative program between DEM's Division of Agriculture, Division of Forest Environment, URI, both their Biocontrol Lab and Plant Clinic, and Rhode Island National History Survey. And in addition to that, we also have a lot of cooperators across the state at farms, vineyards, landowners. We work with different, the Audubon and Nature Conservancy and land trusts. So all kinds of different groups who have at-risk properties that we can set, they're okay with us setting traps at. So we do monitoring through pest trapping and visual survey. So that's in the picture, you can see one of our technicians from a few years ago checking a trap at a farm site. So what we do is we go around the state, we choose high risk areas. We set up traps for these pests and or do visual survey on at-risk crops. So our goal is early pest detection for rapid response. So the sooner we find something, the faster and more efficiently we'd be able to hopefully eradicate it if possible, or at least mitigate a lot of the damage it could cause if left unchecked. So like I mentioned, we do trapping in high-risk areas, and all of the pests that we trap for threaten forests and agricultural commodities. So the program that is bringing you this presentation today is the Forest and Agricultural Pest Outreach Program. It's a collaboration between DEM Agriculture and URI's Biocontrol Lab, and it's funded by the Plant Protection Act, which is formerly known as Farm Bill. So our goal with this program is early detection through outreach, so boots on the ground awareness. So we're trying to reach as many people out in the field as possible, and it runs the gamut between us that are out, like foresters who are out in the forest, farmers, vineyards, even National Grid. We work with DOT. We are hoping to work with the rails. So we try to get a lot of people who are out there and in these areas that Spotted Lanternfly could potentially show up at first. So the funding provides outreach presentations, development and distribution of educational materials. Occasionally we can have public organized visual surveys, and it provides our mainframe for online resources. So you can find a lot of Spotted Lanternfly information on URI Biocontrol website and also on Division of Ag website. So our goal is to inform the public about pests such as the emerald ash borer, the Asian longhorn beetle, and spotted lanternfly. And the reason those are our main goal is because they're kind of easy to identify insects. They are posing an imminent threat. We already have emerald ash borer, but it's part of the program. And so they're pests that the general public would be able to find, and also people who are out in the field, where some of the other moths and beetles that I trap for are not very conspicuous. They look like a lot of native things that we have here. So these are kind of like flashy and devastating. So it helps to have others looking out for it as well. So a little bit about spotted lanternfly. Spotted lanternfly's scientific name is Lycorma delicatula. It's an invasive plant hopper pest, and it's native to China, India, and Vietnam. It was first discovered in the US in 2014 in Berks County, Pennsylvania, and it has since spread to a growing list of states, including New Jersey, Maryland, Delaware, Virginia, West Virginia, Ohio, New York, and Connecticut. And we've had interceptions, which are in individual find of one insect, not necessarily an infestation, and those were found in Massachusetts and New Hampshire in 2020. This pest is associated with tree of heaven, which is Ailanthus altissima, and it's a weedy urban tree commonly found throughout Rhode Island. So here's a picture of where the first introduction was found. So this this picture is actually from 2015. So the actual first infestation was just within the border of Berks County in these towns. So that was found on September 22nd, 2014. And after the initial find, delimitating was done, and that is basically follow-up survey to see how far the spread or the range of the insect spread has gone from the initial finding site. And this delimitation survey suggested that spotted lanternfly was confined only to this small portion of eastern Berks County. So Pennsylvania's response after finding spotted lanternfly was, as I mentioned, delimiting survey. Shipments were also tracked. So shipments that left Berks County were traced, and no additional fines resulted from any of those tracings. And a $5.5 million Farm Bill award was put towards further surveying, monitoring, research, and outreach, as this was an entirely new to the United States pest. So you can watch this graphic. This is the quarantine area and of spotted lanternfly, and it starts in 2014 and spreads till 2018, and you can see just how quickly it spread in just 4 years. So I put this in here to kind of highlight what a big concern this is, and now we're in 2021, and as you saw from that list of states that we have quite a few. It's grown quite a bit. So these are our current impacted locations. So this was updated February 12th, 2021. So you can see how far the spread has gone since 2014, and it's only been 7 years. So the blue areas are counties that spotted lanternfly is currently present in infestation amounts. The red outlined areas are internal state quarantine areas. Oh, I see the comment from Mark. Rhode Island doesn't have it, so it's just completely off the map. So let's hope we stay that way for a little bit. So Mark had asked what happened to Rhode Island on the map. So the red outlined areas are the internal state quarantine areas. The pink dots are individual finds of spotted lanternfly. So you can see it's scattered a little bit throughout Connecticut and Massachusetts, all the way up into New York, other parts of Pennsylvania, down into Virginia. So those are individual finds, and usually if we have an individual find, it's only a matter of maybe a year or two before an infestation is found. So it's kind of a precursor to an infestation. Hi, Molly. Molly asks that Massachusetts had an individual find, and yes, that's right. So if you look up, there's a purple dot in Boston, and that was where one of the finds was. So continued response. There's no current federal quarantine available, so all of these quarantines are state imposed. So some states are imposing it, some are not. So Connecticut does not have currently a state imposed quarantine, but Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Virginia have quarantines for any materials leaving that area. There are also external quarantines, and those are imposed by New York onto infested areas such as Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, New Jersey, Virginia, and West Virginia. So Penn State also has a permitting system. So that's for businesses shipping out of the area, and they get training on how to clean ship. So to make sure that they don't have any egg masses, nymphs, or adults in their shipping contents, and also how to check their vehicles for insects and also egg masses before leaving the quarantine zone. So concern for Rhode Island, as you could see through that graphic, spotted lanternfly is spreading quickly. Despite our quarantines and control measures, populations multiply quickly in infested areas. So you can see the picture of the tree with its just enormous amount of spotted lanternfly adults. They kind of swarm like this and they multiply very quickly. We've had 3 populations found in Fairfield County, Connecticut in fall of 2020, so they are moving towards us, and that we've also had interceptions in Massachusetts as well. And we have high populations of its preferred host, which is tree of heaven, and this would cause a lot of economic impacts on our local vineyards and nursery growers, and not only goods and commodities being sold, but also a lot of our local vineyards are tourist attractions, so also it would impact other parts of our economy as well. So now I'm going to pass it over to Alana, and she's going to talk to you about biology and life cycle and a lot of other fun things. Thanks, Alana.
All right, thanks, Cindy. Very fun, at least in my opinion. I don't have my chat box open, so Cindy or somebody just stop me if there's questions and that you want me to answer. So spotted lanternfly, it's not a moth as it kind of looks like, nor is it a fly as the name suggests. It's a plant hopper in the family Fulgoridae. And so plant hoppers feed on sap of their host plants. And that right photo of the screen, I have an arrow pointing to the mouth part of spotted lanternfly. So that's what's called a piercing sucking mouth part. And they use that mouth part to pierce through the exterior of their host plant and suck the sap out from there. And actually that bottom photo is sort of like a diagram of what lanternflies are doing while they're feeding. So it is a bit different than some of our other invasive pests that we're used to, like the borers and Asian longhorn beetle. Similarly to aphids, lanternflies excrete honeydew while they're feeding, though lanternflies are quite a bit bigger than aphids. So we'll talk a little bit about how and why that is more of a nuisance factor. The adults, luckily for us, are quite distinct. All life stages are quite distinct to identify. So the adults are about 1 inch in length. On the left is what they look like with their hind wings, or with their forewings closed. And then on the bottom right is what they look like with the wings spread. And you can see that very distinct scarlet red when they have their wings spread. It is definitely important to know what they look like with, sort of in both postures, because probably out there in nature, on tree trunks or other surfaces, you're going to see lanternfly with their wings closed and maybe just like a little bit of red peeking through. The females lay eggs in masses of like 30, 50, maybe even 80. They cover it with that gray brown protective covering that's sort of like clay or putty. But you can see from that photo on the left, they don't always cover all of it, so you can kind of actually see each individual egg cell there. So the egg masses as well are about 1 inch in length. The middle photo is just sort of a progression to show what they look like when they're weathered. Definitely that protective covering cracks a little bit more. And that right photo is just a picture of a birch in Pennsylvania. You can see just how many lanternflies there are in the landscape and how they can kind of like aggregate and target one ovipositional substrate in the area. The nymphs go through 4 developmental instars. So first through third, they're what they look like on the left side of the screen. They're black with white markings, and they're about 1 inch to 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 inch in size. And then as they approach that 4th instar, they turn a little bit reddish. They're about 1/2 inch in size. But yeah, they're red with like, black and white markings. So when are you going to see them? What time of year? Lanternflies do have 1 generation per year. So you're going to see each of those life stages only at 1 time of year. Currently, if we did have lanternfly in Rhode Island, we'd be seeing the eggs. That's the overwintering life stage. And it's usually actually coming up pretty soon, late April, May, where the nymphs start to hatch out. So in Pennsylvania, in just about a month, they're probably going to get the first lanternfly egg hatch. Where the newest population in Connecticut is, I'm not sure quite when that hatch will be. Maybe it might be a little bit later if it's a bit colder up here. But anyway, the nymphs will develop through their instars throughout the spring and summer. And then late July, early August is when the adults start to emerge out. And then you can see there's this really extended time period of feeding, aggregating, and flight, where presumably the females are feeding and taking up nutrients so they can develop the eggs in their ovaries. But it's interesting because it isn't until the end of September that they actually start to mate with the males. And then just very quickly after that, end of September, early October, when they lay their egg masses. And the adults are not cold hardy. They will die out within the first freezes of the year. But like I said, the egg masses are the overwintering life stage, and they are quite a bit cold hardy. It will be interesting to see how, as spotted lanternfly spreads, how that cold hardiness and establishment varies among states. But I feel like especially southern Rhode Island, we're pretty coastal. I feel like our winters are probably not severe enough to cull lanternfly populations. So what do they eat? Unfortunately, the host range of spotted lanternfly is quite broad. They're known to feed on over 70 different plant species. So that's both the nymphs and adults that feed on trunks, branches, and stems of their host plants. It seems like the nymphs are a bit more broad with their host range. They feed on a lot of different things, and then the adults tend to narrow down on a shorter list of species, but it's still quite a few. And that does include grapevines, fruit trees, hops, and a list of hardwood trees and ornamentals. So it's quite broad. There is evidence of sort of a strong preference for a shorter list of species, such as tree of heaven, black walnut, grapes, maple, willow. So although they're found on quite a few species, it may actually be a shorter list that they're more likely to be found on, and also maybe that are needed for development. There is some evidence, early research evidence of diet mixing does help optimize fitness. So there's an association there. And as well, there is, lanternflies do feed on a few invasives, so that's kind of important implications for management, because these invasives could harbor or support lanternfly populations, such as bittersweet, multiflora rose, and like Cindy mentioned, tree of heaven. When considering the host range of spotted lanternfly, it's important to consider the seasonal host phenology. So here's a figure from a management guide from Penn State University. It's just sort of a snapshot of what lanternflies may be feeding on throughout the year. And basically, I think the take home here is that, the impact can be aggregated and concentrated on certain plants at certain times of year. So it's really important to kind of consider the whole picture when thinking about the host range of spotted lanternflies, since they're moving around to different plants at different times of year and when they're in different life stages. And the thought process here is that as plants senesce, they're less likely to be a host for spotted lanternfly. And the thinking behind that is that the musculature of the lanternflies inside their bodies isn't actually strong enough to suck the sap out of their host plants. So they really need to rely on heavy sap flow of their plants to facilitate that feeding. So of course they're going to be targeting, healthy and active hosts that, their vascular system is doing what it's supposed to be doing at that time of year. I just want to stop and show a few videos because I think it's very interesting to see them in action. The one on the right plays first. And so these are lanternfly adults swarming at an apple orchard, and you can see that the fruit's pretty mature at this point, so this is probably pretty close to harvest time. If this were a pick your own operation, it would be quite a nuisance. Lanternflies don't harm humans, but I imagine that the general public probably doesn't want to go to an orchard that has this number and abundance of lanternfly. And then the video on the left shows lanternfly nymphs that are crawling along on a fence. This is in Pennsylvania. I think that they move quite quickly. They're pretty jumpy too. So I think this is interesting to just kind of see how they move and how quick they could kind of, if you put your backpack down next to this bittersweet plant, it could be an issue for getting them and transferring them onto your possessions. So what's the risk of lanternfly moving around and spreading to other areas, and specifically our area? Well, it's pretty high. The egg masses are quite inconspicuous. And not only that, they're found on tree trunks and branches, but also stone and smooth man-made surfaces, including vehicles. So you can see how they can go undetected pretty easily and then be moved around across state lines or county lines pretty easily. So those two left hand photos are the upper one is one I took in Connecticut of an egg mass on a branch. And then the bottom one is one pallet wood, probably taken in Pennsylvania. And of course, we know that pallet wood is used in the shipment of a lot of commodities, and it moves around quite a bit. So egg masses going undetected on a surface like this is definitely an issue for spread. Additionally, the adults are pretty good flyers. Like I mentioned, they have that really long period of time where they're feeding, aggregating, and swarming around. And there's been reports of the lanternflies traveling miles from, like a forested edge into vineyards where they really like to be later on in the season. And additionally, like you saw in that video, the nymphs are pretty quick and jumpy. Cindy and I experienced that firsthand while we were in Pennsylvania. We were standing under a black walnut tree that had nymphs all over it, and we just we were just covered in lanternfly nymphs and had to do a pretty thorough check before we left the area to make sure we weren't transferring them anywhere. And the take home here is that spotted lanternfly is a great hitchhiker, and thorough checks before moving items into or out of the quarantine, wherever you are, with internal or external quarantines, is critical to slow the spread of spotted lanternfly. More specifically about the risk of spotted lanternfly coming to Rhode Island, here is a map from a paper by Wakey et al. It's modeling the potential distribution of spotted lanternfly in the state, and you can see if you look closely at Rhode Island, we're sort of in the medium suitability for spotted lanternfly establishment. I have heard some criticisms about this model, so maybe it's not the most accurate one, but it is demonstrating that, I think Rhode Island fully qualifies for having the right conditions and habitat for supporting spotted lanternfly. And you can even look, just next door, and most of Connecticut is actually high suitability for spotted lanternfly, and we know it's already there. So I think the introduction and establishment is safe to say it's pretty likely at this point. And then I also have this nice USDA map. So this is mapping the relative likelihood of spotted lanternfly introduction into the state. And so that model is based on features that correspond with the entry of spotted lanternfly to a new area. So vehicle traffic volume, human population density, rail node density, and revenue from industry pathways. And darker red indicates higher likelihood of introduction. So you can see where we have a lot of transportation, tourism, industry, rail lines, highways. There's definitely hot spots for high spotted lanternfly introduction. And like Cindy mentioned, we do have a high abundance of tree of heaven in our state, which likes our disturbed and urban areas. And I bet that the distribution of tree of heaven overlays and overlaps pretty well with these hotspots of high spotted lanternfly likelihood of introduction. So spotted lanternfly is pretty sneaky. It's a good hitchhiker. It evades the inspectors in Pennsylvania that are doing checks along the highway, the state police in Pennsylvania and New York that are doing it. It's pretty easy to go unnoticed. And in fact, I couldn't resist but add this slide. Spotted lanternfly can even evade the Secret Service. So here's a hilarious photo, I'm assuming, of when President Biden was on the campaign trail in Pennsylvania recently, where a spotted lanternfly landed on his shoulder, and the photo was snapped to be forever in the archive of photos. So I think that was just pretty funny, and I couldn't resist including that in this presentation. So we know it's high risk that it's going to come here. What is the actual impact on plants? Lanternfly is largely considered a plant stressor, so it can, it's likely that it'll significantly damage hosts when present in combination with other stressors. So that could be drought or disease, other weather events as well. So it's thought, it has a host range of over 70 plants. It's not going to kill all 70 plant species on that list, and not every tree that it lands on. But when combination with the right factors, it definitely could do some damage there. So on the topic of lanternfly feeding in combination with other stressors, that top right photo is a photo of a canker on a maple tree. These were street trees in Pennsylvania, and they were seeing these cankers develop after these trees were hit pretty hard with spotted lanternfly feeding. They isolated the pathogen in that canker. They found the opportunistic fungus, Botrytis. So this is a good demonstration of sort of that secondary, that cascade after lanternfly feeding, what could happen. And I don't know exactly what happened to these trees. I think they're dead or dying. And that I think has a pretty important implication towards, especially like if we're thinking about our urban forestry aspects, street trees, especially these specimen trees, could be at risk here for feeding damage and later stress. That's not to say though, heavy sustained feeding on a single tree could lead to tree mortality. I think there have been reports of that, maybe more so towards tree of heaven, but I think other species, preferred species too, that there is the possibility of that. This is no surprise. You know, what the scientists are saying the feeding is doing is lowering the photosynthesis rate of trees, amongst other things that they're researching. And it's thought that, you know, aside from many things that could limit the energy storage going into winter, so stressing these trees even more if it's not specifically mechanical energy injury as well. So what are the actual signs of lanternfly feeding? That could include oozing sap, wilting, leaf curling, flagging, or just parts of canopy dieback. And then another impact on plants, it's sort of like a secondary impact that doesn't involve lanternfly actual direct feeding, is a sooty mold that builds up on that honeydew excretion that I mentioned. When the lanternflies are feeding higher up in the canopy, that sooty mold can build up on lower canopy branches and understory plants. And with sooty mold buildup, that could block the photosynthesis of those plants and cause mortality. So sort of like a secondary cascade where the lanternflies maybe didn't feed on that part of the plant or those plants, but it could still cause injury to them. So the big question, how is it predicted that spotted lanternfly will impact the forest ecosystem? That's a pretty broad question. And I think, you know, since the invasion of spotted lanternfly is still relatively new in most states and even Pennsylvania, this will be an ongoing question that will be very interesting to see how it plays out. It's likely going to be more of a slow burn than compared to where lanternfly, you know, the impacts we're seeing in agriculture, you know, specifically grapes, where total vineyards, there's been maybe a few reports of total vineyards just being wiped out. And because the host range is pretty broad, it's going to be a little bit more nuanced in terms of, you know, what we really see for the impacts. And, you know, like we all know, some of these processes in forested ecosystems definitely take a little bit longer than other systems. It's generally thought that currently that forests are likely a reservoir for spotted lanternfly. So scientists and managers are having a hard time going into the forest and finding obvious huge populations of spotted lanternfly. So it's been difficult for them to survey and therefore manage for spotted lanternfly in the forest ecosystem. But what they are seeing is that at that time of year where the adults start moving around a lot, they're coming in droves from the forest edge, so the forest ecosystem, into places like vineyards where they like to be later in the season. So that forest reservoir is definitely a key piece that needs to be studied and paid attention to in terms of really, you know, how we're going to manage and approach spotted lanternfly. So I don't want to sound any alarm bells, because I think the total long-term impacts are really, especially for the forest ecosystem, up in the air as of now. But I think it's pretty evident that there's the potential for broad stress impacts on the whole stand level here from spotted lanternfly. And Kelly Hoover from Penn State University, she's a researcher that does a lot of work on like how spotted lanternfly is actually impacting their host plants and trees in the forest system. I took this quote straight from one of her recent presentations where she said forest productivity is likely to decline without managing large populations of lanternfly adults. So here's somebody that's on the front line that's thinking that lanternfly is to some extent going to have an impact on the forest ecosystem. So there's a lot of research ongoing on you know, how lanternfly is impacting subjects related to forestry and the forest ecosystem and forest health. That includes wood quality impacts, mechanical feeding damage thresholds, the ability for lanternfly to vector diseases, and the impact of lanternfly feeding on seed production. So that last one especially, I think, is a pretty important one, especially we know that forest regeneration is a very important topic for forest health in general. And that actually leads me to this next slide, which I want to talk about lanternfly feeding and causing seedling stress. So I have a progression of photos here taken by Emily Swackhammer from Penn State University. So these are nymphs that were feeding on a black walnut seedling. And in this first photo, you can see there's some, I don't know, mid to late instar lanternfly nymphs feeding on the tender parts of that black walnut seedling. As time progresses, you can see early signs of foliar stress, some yellowing of those leaves, and then lower in the photo, you can see the potential for sooty mold buildup where there's honeydew building up and maybe even a little bit of sooty mold evident there as well. Even later in the progression, you can see this is a very stressed seedling. There's extensive flagging of the leaves here, and it, in general, does not look very good. And then Emily Swackhammer came back a year later to do a progress check-in on that, and that the arrow on that photo is pointing to the terminal leader of this seedling, and it's dead. And there are other cases where the feeding from lanternflies caused form issues, so like the start of codominant stems. And in general, I think the lanternflies lanternfly feeding definitely has implications on seedling health and forest regeneration. So I think this may be more of some of the early impacts that we're going to see with a lanternfly invasion, and it won't be until later that we could possibly even measure or see what lanternflies could do to a mature tree, or what they're necessarily doing to mature trees. But certainly the seedling health and forest and how that impacts forest regeneration, I think, is going to be a hot topic for the forest ecosystem health as lanternfly comes in. And of course, there's a long list of other groups that are impacted by spotted lanternfly. That's homeowners, the industry, trucking, shipping, also growers. So for homeowners, that swarming that we sometimes see lanternflies doing is definitely quite a bit of a nuisance, and also that honeydew that they excrete certainly is a nuisance to homeowners, where it's getting all over everything. It's unsightly and it's a little bit bothersome. For like the trucking and transportation industries, there's largely just been issues with compliance, but this is a huge issue. The upper right photo I have is actually a truck that's sitting directly under a tree of heaven tree, just waiting to get a gravid female to lay her egg mass on, or a nymph or adult to just stow away on and be spread other places. So there's definitely been issues with businesses just increase in labor and just ensuring that they're not moving around infested material. There's potential fines that are associated with that in Pennsylvania. And also that permitting system that Cindy mentioned that Pennsylvania is doing. I did hear that recently that they had something like 26,000 businesses involved in that permitting system. So that's not employees or permittees, that's businesses that could have a huge staff of employees. So that just kind of shows the extent to how many people are involved in this process, and how, there's a lot of different articles that qualify for regulation moving in and out of these states. So this is a huge undertaking, and to ensure that all these businesses and people are not moving around infested material is definitely costly and labor intensive. In terms of the growers, the grape growers have definitely been the hardest hit. And I think this is really the one group that we're seeing the earliest and the biggest impacts of spotted lanternfly. These growers are experiencing yield loss and even vine death as a result of just directly lanternfly feeding. So that bottom right photo is a vineyard in Pennsylvania, where the feeding either directly or later in the year due to cold stress caused a wipeout of all of that growers' vines. So this has also increased the number of insecticide sprays, the average number of insecticide sprays in these vineyards from 4, which is about $54 an acre, to 14, which is about $147 an acre between 2016 and 18. So this has become very, very costly and labor intensive for the growers, and they're trying to keep up with it. And it really, these insecticides might have good initial impact of cutting back lanternfly numbers, but the reintroduction of just the numbers that are out there in the landscape, you go back 3 days after the spray and there's just as many in the vineyard. Also, the ornamental nursery growers, there's definitely issues with compliance about not moving around infested material. There have been reports of trace forwards. Cindy's gets news of that all the time, where a stowaway lanternfly made it its way on some nursery stock to a state that doesn't have a spotted lanternfly infestation currently. And when tracing that back, it's come from a nursery or something from the infestation zone. So that's been an issue, definitely pretty labor intensive for these growers and operations to comply with the quarantine and the permits. And also some of those ornamental trees are definitely favored host by spotted lanternfly. So this industry as well is seeing feeding damage from lanternflies. So I think it's not really a stretch to say that lanternflies are having a huge impact on the economy in Pennsylvania. So I have this quote taken straight from the Penn State Extension website. If not contained, spotted lanternfly could drain Pennsylvania's economy of at least $324 million annually. And that's according to an analysis conducted by economists that were sponsored by the Center for Rural Pennsylvania. So no surprise there, it has the potential to have huge economic impacts in Pennsylvania and the Mid-Atlantic. And I imagine if and when it comes closer and more into New England, we could see the same thing. So I'll just go a little bit quickly because I know we're trying to stay on topic with the agenda, but I just want to touch on some of the management methods that are available. This is where, lanternflies do have infestations. So these are management methods that are recommended in Pennsylvania. I think, if you want to look further into it, there's so much information out there on the extension websites, but I'll just touch on what's available. There are cultural and mechanical methods available, such as scraping eggs physically off of their surfaces and squishing them. That I just want to mention, there has been research that came out recently that I think 90 or 95% of the egg masses on a tree are found 3 meters or above into the canopy. So in terms of what you're seeing at eye level, you're just seeing the tip of the iceberg if you see lanternfly egg masses there. So that's a pretty interesting bit of data that just came out recently. Also, there's tree banding and trapping that are available. The removal of tree of heaven, which I'll touch on a little bit. There's also chemical management methods that are available. So there's nymph and adult targeted insecticides that are labeled for use in Pennsylvania. And there's also a bit of biocontrol management research that's been happening on 2 parasitoid and 2 fungal pathogen species currently. Just to touch on that whole subject of tree of heaven, I don't think I need to tell anybody here, but in terms of suggesting to stakeholders or landowners, if they want to feel empowered to try to do something to combat spotted lanternfly, there is the talk or question of whether or not tree of heaven should be removed. If it is decided to be removed, it is an invasive herbicide is necessary. Mechanical removal will not do anything. It will just cause more to sprout up and maybe even contribute more to the abundance of tree of heaven in the area. But out of that conversation, there's been a lot of question of should growers and landowners remove all of the tree of heaven on their property? And I think, on one hand, there has been research that came out that said when lanternfly adults in their diet, when tree of heaven was excluded, they were not as prolific as when they did have access to tree of heaven. So the females laid less eggs and they developed slower when they did not have tree of heaven. No, on the other hand, managing tree of heaven, I think, is impossible to remove all of it in our area, in our state, and it's also very costly. So I think it really is comes down to, to recommend this would be really on a site-specific basis, and really what would be the purpose of it. You really kind of have to think about it critically. But I think on a state level, there's no point in trying to remove all of the tree of heaven, or if it's not in the budget, and it seems nearly impossible anyway. And it could be a good surveillance tool. That's actually what Cindy's been doing a lot of, and URI's been trying to help with that too, is just surveying for tree of heaven in the state so that we have an idea of the hot spots, because that's a good place to go when we get our first few reports of spotted lanternfly. We want to know how big the extent is. Well, we can go to tree of heaven, because if they are here, they're likely going to be on the tree of There is one other management approach when related to tree of heaven. That's the trap tree approach. So that's, cutting back the population of tree of heaven in a given area to just a few trees, and then those few trees treating with a systemic insecticide. So when spotted lanternfly come in and feed on those trees, they're ingesting the insecticide and die. And I think this is a good suggestion depending on what the situation is. So if you have a grower, like a grape grower, spotted lanternfly really like grapes as well. Removing all the tree of heaven, I think, would not be a good idea because they'll just bypass that forested edge and go straight in towards the grapes. But if you have trap trees surrounding your vineyard, they might kind of act as sort of a buffer where they land on the tree of heaven first, ingest the insecticide and die before they get to the vineyard edge. And so that kind of transitions into, there's a lot of ongoing research, especially on chemical management of spotted lanternfly and for a lot of different groups like growers, nursery practitioners, and more. But I just wanted to highlight this one study which characterized the spatial distributions of spotted lanternfly in vineyards. And they found that largely the majority of spotted lanternfly were just on the vineyard edge or maybe up to 15 meters into the vineyard. So that does have implications on where insecticide sprays should be targeted. There's no need for these, it's likely no need for these growers to be spraying their entire vineyard with insecticides if they can just target the edge of the vineyard and knock back most of the lanternflies there. Just a quick update on biocontrol prospects. There are 2 parasitoid species that are being studied. That's Anastatus orientalis, an egg parasitoid, and Dryanus sinicus, which is a nymphal parasitoid. That top photo on the right is the Dryanus adult, and it actually has this really cool raptorial forelegs that it uses to grab the spotted lanternfly nymph. And then that middle photo is a lanternfly nymph that's been attacked by Dryanus. That white sac that's attached under the wing pad is called a thalassium, and that's where the developing Dryanus larva is, and that's how it feeds on the lanternfly nymph. And as it develops, it will slowly kill the lanternfly nymph until it's ready to emerge out as an adult wasp. And additionally, there's been research on 2 naturally occurring fungal pathogens, that's Batcoa major and Beauveria bassiana. In fact, Penn State and Cornell are testing a biopesticide spray containing Beauveria currently to see how effective it is at knocking back spotted lanternfly in the landscape. So that bottom right photo is a lanternfly nymph that was attacked by Beauveria. So what should you do, or what can you tell your stakeholders and landowners to do to prepare for and respond to a lanternfly invasion? I think really the best thing, it's most important just to process that awareness and early detection is key for our early response to the spotted lanternfly. What you can do now, or what your stakeholders can do now, is really just learn how to identify all stages of spotted lanternfly. So that includes what they look like and also what time of year you're going to be finding each stage. If they suspect that they found a spotted lanternfly, we ask that people try to take a photo or collect a specimen. That's really the best way for us to really confirm the identity of that specimen and make sure it is spotted lanternfly. And with that photo or specimen, they can go to the DEM spotted lanternfly sighting report form, which is linked here. And I can also kind of throw that in the chat box once we're done, if people want to save that on their bookmarks bar or anything like that. But people can report their spotted lanternfly potential find there. It's so new, and I know we're all a very well acquainted group that Cindy and I are open to getting emails if there's ever questions or suspected spotted lanternfly in that way. I think just really any more communication at this point when we're waiting to see the first introduction is a good way to contact us. And just staying updated with the spread forecast and research updates and just more news like that is probably one of the best ways to prepare for the spotted lanternfly invasion. So here's the DEM spotted lanternfly page and also the URI spotted lanternfly page, which I have on our last page that I can keep up for a few minutes if you want to jot that down. And just one last quick plug, there's a lot of information if you don't find what you want on our Rhode Island websites. There's a lot of information out there on other extension websites. Penn State has just tons out there, especially lots on their management page. They have specific management guides for homeowners, landscape professionals, grape growers, Christmas tree growers. They have a webinar for spotted lanternfly in the forest ecosystem. It is a 3-hour webinar, but I think that it would be of interest to this group if anybody had an extra 3 hours of their life to spare. And, they're constantly giving research updates and stuff like that. And this Spotted Lanternfly dashboard by Temple University, I think is going to be a really good tool for us to use in the future. It's being developed right now, but some of these tools are active currently. It's just really good mapping and communication of past spread of spotted lanternfly, development forecast, hatch forecast, high risk areas. I think there's a lot of modeling and mapping tools out there that are being developed to really communicate the spread and potential spread of spotted lanternfly. So with that, I just want to say thanks, everyone. Here's Cindy in my email if you don't already have it, and the DEM and URI Spotted Lanternfly web pages. And I think I'll open it up for Cindy and I to take any questions if we have some time.
Thank you for the great in-depth presentation, Cindy and Alana.
Thank you.
Really glad to have you here as part of the partnership to give it to us. Yes,
Thanks for having us.
Got some time for questions and discussion. Well, I'll throw out one. This may be a little early, but for silvicultural guidance with the lanternfly, but I wanted to ask about that since that's what we foresters do.
Yeah, I think so. Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture has some good best management practices out there. I don't know how updated it is, but there's a lot of information out there. I think I could link up that document too. That might give a lot of information. I personally actually haven't read all of it. I think it's quite a few pages. And I think there is a concentration on silviculture and the logging industry and how that's sort of having what sort of impact that's going to have. I feel like this whole broad umbrella of how lanternfly will impact the forest ecosystem is still quite an unknown, but there really is an interest in that to really try to get some early data on how to really help our silviculturists and practitioners moving forward.
Can we expect them, you had a long feeding season on different species. Can you expect them to jump from species to species?
Yes. Yeah.
So they'll start off with Ailanthus and then just go to walnut or willows?
Yeah, they kind of, depending on the time of year, they kind of swarm as a big group. And that's also why Alana mentioned with the pesticide treatments, how grape growers might kill a population and then another population might move in 2 or 3 weeks later. They're constantly moving and constantly finding whatever the best host of the week is.
Yeah, and I think there's an interesting concept where they are seeing that there's the seasonal host phenology where they're moving to different species throughout the year. But then there's also this weird phenomena where there could be a maple tree, 2 maple trees in the landscape, and the lanternflies just want to be on one and not the other. And whatever that means about the physiology of that tree or whatever communication is happening with lanternfly, there's an interesting phenomena there where, they could be very specific in the landscape of a specific tree they want. And that could also change from day to day. So,
and they're still not sure if that's just a behavioral thing or if that's something to actually do with the tree. Because they do tend to aggregate together. So they'll all want to be even the picture that Alana had with the egg masses, they'll all want to be in the same area at the same time. It's very strange.
There's been some research on the auditory attraction of lanternflies. I think it even was developed from people noticing that lanternflies were attacked. Say that again, Cindy?
They were using a table saw, and when they were chopping into the wood, the high pitched noise or potentially the vibration attracted spotted lanternfly right to the person cutting wood. And also, I think it was in a ship's port, they had these electrical lines that were running out to when a ship was docked in port and they were hooking up to the electrical. And there was a high tension kind of vibration, and spotted lanternflies were attracted to the to the line, and they're still not sure if it was the high-pitched noise or a vibration.
Mhm.
Are there any kinds of, climate or, site conditions that they like certain, moist climate conditions or, presence of water nearby, those kinds of things?
That's a good question. I'm not so sure on like the micro site level about that, like a preference. I'm trying to think. I think the host condition and the host state is really probably the most important attracting factor there. There are studies on like time of day, like lanternflies aren't very active in the morning, more towards the later parts of the day.
And that has to do with like the tree and the sunlight. Like sunlight increases the turgor pressure of the trees, I believe. And then the higher the turgor pressure, the more likely spotted lanternfly would want to feed on it, because they're doing that passive feeding. So I think they might prefer edge trees, forest edge trees, because they have more sunlight. It's a possibility.
There is also an interesting observation of them being very attracted to like the tallest tree or pole in the area. So I don't know what that necessarily means for in the forest. If that's coming from like a field to the forested edge, they're going very high up, or the researchers are definitely trying to capitalize on that and how that could help with management, like looking at putting insecticide impregnated nets high up on like 13-meter high poles, and that can kind of create a wall and sort of act as a buffer to keep lanternfly away from certain areas. So the behavior of the insect is pretty interesting, and there's just a lot unknown still.
Great. Well, thanks so much. Again, I'm sure we're going to be hearing and talking more about the lanternfly. So glad that we have both of you participating in the partnership.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
I actually have to jump off now to join a spotted lanternfly call. So thank you everybody for listening to our presentation. Thank you, Alana.
Thank you.
Normally Cindy says this, I'm just gonna mention the printed materials, Cindy. We have lots of printed outreach materials. If you guys have any interest in distribution to your landowners, your stakeholders, other groups, we have a lot of stuff, identification cards, rack cards with information on who to contact and stuff like that.
Yeah, you're welcome to send either me or Alana an email. We both have pretty ample stocks of stuff because we haven't been able to be in person and do any sort of tabling events or anything. So we want you guys to take it. So if you want to contact us, please feel welcome to. And thank you again. I'll see you guys next meeting.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Right. I guess we will at this point shift our attention over to the policy and legislative part of the meeting. And I got some very good news since our February meeting, in that as I'm sure you all know, the beach clean water and green infrastructure bond passed, and that included the $3 million of funding for natural and working lands, that's farm and forest lands. And we were interested in hearing an update from DEM on how that may be used, or what plans are afoot on that front.
Thanks, Christopher. So update is going to be quick on this as it relates to the forestry dollars. So the bond had a $3 million inclusion on there for working lands, and we've partitioned out $1 million of that for forest land. And incidentally, it works out good for us that the RCPP, RCCP, RCPP, however you say that Kate put in for, that $1 million is going to be earmarked as match from DEM for that project. So we had a conversation at our land acquisition meeting, and that was approved by that committee to be able to use that fund to help provide match for that grant. Fingers crossed that everything goes through.
Yeah, let's hope we get it.
Yeah.
For a recap, that's for easements statewide on forest
Yeah,
land.
so essentially the legacy program blown up further out than what the legacy properties are. You know, not exactly legacy, but you get my drift. Yeah. So that's the update on that. It really is a quick one, and it's worked out good for us that we have a vessel that we can put that money into quickly. I don't know, Ken, if you have an update on the other portion of the money, but.
No, the other 2/3 of that are for farmland protection and our farmland access program. And the lines aren't perfect, obviously. The blur depends upon what projects are happening, but it gives us $3 million to work with and continue our efforts to protect forests, and farmland access, which is a program by which we buy farmland, own it for a short period of time, and then sell it to a newer beginning farmer, which is kind of a unique thing. But it's at least restocks the coffers for a period of time to come.
Ken, how's that going with the South Kingstown property? Do you have a lot of offers? Are people interested?
A lot of phone calls about it. We've got to go before the applications are due, but a lot of interest in it, and it's the first time we've ever done it, and it's pretty unique amongst state governments in general. So it's so far so good.
Thanks. Well, we will follow that along and certainly be interested to hear what happens with the RCPP. While we're talking policy, got other efforts and initiatives afoot, including the Forest Conservation Act that was introduced to both chambers of the General Assembly. There was the Senate hearing for that yesterday, in which a number of us participated. Though, if those of you from DEM or Scott, who've been closely involved in it, would like to talk about that, Bill.
I'll start off and DEM can fill in. Very pleased. I thought the hearing went extremely well. By my count, there were 8 people who gave verbal testimony in favor of the bill. And I'm aware of at least 9 others who testified by written comments, with all supporting the bill. There were only 2 proposed amendments to the bill. They're not real significant, but just to give you a heads up, Rupert and Meg both testified that they'd like to see the definition of forest change from 10 acres to 5. Previously, I had explained to Rupert that the reason that we went with 10 acres is because it's already in state law, and I didn't think it was a good idea to have 2 conflicting definitions, but nonetheless, that's his board voted to suggest that change. Rupert also suggested that the Forest Conservation Commission that's proposed in the bill also be involved with I guess reviewing and establishing criteria for land acquisition. I think at a previous meeting of the Woodland Partnership, I thought we reached a consensus that we didn't want to do that because it would just add sort of another layer. And I think I thought the consensus was people were pleased with the way the process is going now. So it's not clear on how those proposed amendments will be treated. They would have to be a sub A for them to be considered. But overall, I thought the hearing went well. I'll let everybody know when the hearing is going to be in the House. Oh, one last thing. I think the best testimony was Ken Ayers. It was literally a love fest. The committee made it, for those of you who listened in, I think the committee's biggest concern was, Ken, you're doing such a good job. We just don't want you to retire. Kudos to you, Ken.
I got some comments about my age at the hearing, but Thanks, Scott. I mean, it's a little weird for me because the way testimony is literally you're talking into a phone. You can't see anybody else. You can't hear anybody else's testimony. It's really isolating. So, you know, I did my piece on the phone, and then, you know, you're done. So I'm glad to hear that no one else apparently testified against it, and all the testimonies seem supportive. DEM wanted to make sure that we were on record as being a supporter, and I just tried to, you know, provide some high-level reasons why. So I'm glad so far so good, and thanks also to Scott for, you know, all he's done to get it to this point on the whole team, and TJ for all that he's done within the Division of Forest Environment as well. So we'll hope for a good result with the whole thing.
Well, thanks, Scott, for letting us know when the Senate hearing is.
I have a question for Scott. I don't know if you know the answer to this, but since they started off that hearing last night, as someone else pointed out rather rudely, that you know, all the bills that they had last night were basically tabled for further consideration. I'm not sure exactly the language on that, but I mean, what does it take to get these things back on the plate once, you know, are they actually, is it going to take consistent involvement on your behalf, on our behalf, to make sure that it rises back to the top after this?
Mark, that's a good question. And again, the hearing went just at, what they do is the committee voted that at the beginning of the hearing to hold all the bills for further consideration. And I understand why they do that, because there's a large volume of written comments that are also submitted. I'm trying to get a handle on how many written comments were submitted regarding this particular bill. I couldn't find it on their website, but I'll try to track that down. So theoretically, the committee looks through all that information, or at least they should, to make a final determination. And often they'll reconvene, you know, at some point in the future to vote certain bills out to the full Senate floor. Hopefully this will be one of them, but in the meantime, we sort of can't rest on our laurels. I know DM is not allowed to advocate, but I can. So I would encourage you all to still continue to let your state representatives know that you support this bill. It's important. You want them to vote it out. And it's not a bad idea to connect with the committee chairs. And it's also good to connect with the Senate president and, of course, the speaker. The more they hear there's interest in something, the more likely this is to emerge.
Okay. Thanks for all you did, Scott, and are doing. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Is one of the chambers thought to be more friendly to the bill than the other?
That's a good question. That's probably a good question for Ryan Mulcahy. He's been following this very closely, and according to Ryan, who spends this time of year almost all his time on legislative issues, he hasn't heard anyone that's going to oppose the bill. I mean, so far, that's as of a couple of days ago. So I think Ryan probably would have heard it, or certainly the DEM director, Janet, would have heard it by now if someone was upset with this bill. And it doesn't appear that there's anybody out there that has major issues with it.
That's great. Great. Well, any other discussion of the Forest Conservation Act, or, you know, or other, you know, policy or legislative topics?
I'm going to have to hop off, and I apologize for that, but anything else from Team Day, the forestry team, you know, feel free to chip in. All right. See you, folks.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, another topic that certainly we'll be returning to this spring. Let's see what we can launch into our round of updates. I'll just go around the screen as we do and call on people. Alana, in addition to the spotted lanternfly, is there anything else you'd like to provide an update on?
Sure, thanks. So I'm going to throw the link to that best management practices document from Pennsylvania I was thinking about. I realized, and I haven't read it, but it's more for like forest products, but there could be some tidbits of information there. So I put that in there. And then to address some stuff with FEMC, I just wanted to let the group know that we came up with our 2021 sprint project topic, which will be a data rescue project where we can, we have a lot of various forest health related data that is in various forms and within various organizations that need to be centralized and digitized. And so that's what FEMC will help us work on this year. And I think that's a good, I know that the Woodland Partnership was great with helping establish last year's sprint project topic, but I think this year will be helpful to, establish further gaps that we have in our forest health data and a jumping off point from there. So certainly keep the group in the loop with more information, but that was just decided on last week. And then I just have one other question. I'm kind of interested among the group. I'm not sure. So in terms of for FEMC, we are establishing forest health monitoring plots in the state. I've been doing a little bit of investigating. There's been some proposed old FIA plots that I'm looking into. I just kind of want to put the feelers out there if anybody in the group knows of other public land, conservation land that's unmanaged, particularly with the oak hickory forest type that could be suitable. I know TJ, I know there's some DM land in Richmond that may be qualify for research use later. I'll keep that in mind. But I didn't know if anybody else had any thoughts on tracts of land to investigate.
Alana, you said unmanaged land, so properties that nobody's out there doing thinning or harvesting or anything like that on.
Yeah, I think that's preferable. With Rhode Island being quite small and encroachingly developed, I think we'll see what we can get. But yeah, if there were unmanaged stands out there, conservation lands, properties.
Seems like it might be a good thing for someone to mention at the Land and Water Conservation Summit for the Rhode Island crowd over the next couple of days.
When is that this year? I'm not in the loop.
Tomorrow and Saturday.
Okay. All right. So I'm not quite sure. I have some TNC land that I've been looking at, and I have some contenders, but I just also wanted to put out the feelers in case there was something that anybody really knew right off the top tip of their hat. That's not the right phrase, but anyway, anything that anybody can think of there. I know Christopher and David, or maybe anybody else, you guys have the closest URI relations. Do you know who to get in contact with about conducting research at the Alton Jones campus?
No, I don't. The administrative position of the campus has been changing a lot. I could drop a line to Peter Snyder, who's the vice president of research, and find out if he would like to advocate for research out there. He might well.
Sure, if you don't mind, I'm interested. I know that the camp closed down for their summer camp and all that due to COVID and other financial reasons. But yeah, if they were to support a forest health monitoring plot, it could be something of interest to explore.
I owe him an email, so I could include that. That'd be good. Yep.
Great.
I'll talk to you offline to get to frame it.
Absolutely. Thanks. And that's all I have for an update.
Thanks, Alana. We go over to Molly into the city.
Put me on the spot as the first one. Well, I guess the big news is that we are wrapping up the Doris Duke grant. So for our work to develop a suite of tools centered in tree equity and trying to optimize our urban forests for climate and health outcomes. And One of the big ticket items was our tree equity score analyzer, which is a GIS-based map that is a planning and policy tool. And it's super cool because you can go all the way down to the parcel level and look at creating scenarios, then look at how that impacts different targets that you have for tree equity. And it incorporates a lot of data from Department of Health and demographic data, all kind of wrapped up with our tree canopy data, which was I'm forgetting now, I think it was 2018 LIDAR data. And I believe that RIDEM should have that data layer available soon. So I checked today to see if it was, but I don't think yet. So that's the big thing. And I can actually add a link to the tree equity score analyzer, Tessa, here, if you guys want to play around with it. And I'm giving a presentation actually for the now Rhode Island, it's combined, right? The Rhode Island, Massachusetts Land Conservation Conference. So I'll be speaking on Saturday with Rachel from the Department of Health and Cassie from the Neighborhood Planting Program in Providence. So it'll be the latest on the tools that we've developed and how our partners are using them.
Nice. Glad you'll be sharing that with our friends in Massachusetts at the conference.
Yep.
Go over to David.
Thanks, Christopher. So we're just putting together plans for another spadefoot toad restoration this spring. People probably might have heard about the one we did in Richmond 2 years ago, and we were ready to go on one last year and had to put it off. But we just ordered the fish grade liners for these new breeding pools, and we'll be working with South Kingstown Land Trust on some forest and forest edge sites for these new toad pools. So that's really cool. And we'll be looking for volunteers on the 8th, 9th, and 10th of April to help pull the pool liners around and shovel dirt and stuff like that. So you can stay tuned for an announcement about that. I just checked earlier on our videos that from these meetings that I've been putting up. We have 100 views across the previous 3 videos, and no one is more astonished than me. You know, I didn't look at the watch time. It's never the whole thing, but 100 is a lot for a YouTube video. So that's really cool.
Maybe it's Paul because he misses being at our meetings. He just watches them over and over.
Over and over again. Yeah. And we just released the next issue of the Rhode Island Naturalist, which is our revitalized bulletin, which includes science articles as well as essays and short field news. There's some bios on our award winners, our Distinguished Naturalist Award winners, as well as a couple of obits for naturalists who've passed away recently. So we send out an email to members today. So if you're a member of the Natural History Survey, you should have a link to that in your inbox. And if you're not a member, that's very inexpensive and you should join. Or if you insist on not joining, we'll be sending out a link to everybody next week to the whole world. So you take a look at that. And the last thing was more of a question. So that's why I left it to the end. So I had heard something kind of secondhand about a new natural community land cover mapping contract that DEM is working on with environmental monitor with EDC, Environmental Data Center. So, and I haven't heard anything about that. I guess it's with 2020 imagery, but I haven't heard what. Well, I'm most concerned that we continue to use the same natural community classification as the previous mapping effort so that things are comparable, but I haven't heard anything about what degree of detail that contract will be mapping to and what the marching orders are for that. But that would be pretty important for all of us working on forest environments. So does anybody have any more information about what's going on with that?
I only unmuted to say that I have no further information. I'm sorry.
All right.
I did see something came across, but from Paul Jordan, but I haven't been involved, so it might not be at the level yet where there's information to share. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, the survey was involved in setting up kind of the a semi-automated mapping system in the last go round, and we helped to set up kind of the training protocol or whatever it is for the automation on that. And we used the natural community classification system that was developed by DEM, the Nature Conservancy, the survey, and everybody. And so I'm just surprised that I hadn't heard anything about it. I was wondering where we were with that.
Yeah, if you want to send me a note, I can follow up.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Thanks, David. Clearly a lot going on with the survey. Let's move over to Patrick. Would you like to report on what's going on in the Southern District?
Yeah, sure. Just want to say thank you for letting me be a fly on the wall today. Really enjoyed it. Yeah, I mean, I'm brand new. I've only been with the district for 3 weeks now. So not much to report. I've been going on a few farm site visits, which has been really interesting. A couple in Arcadia and one in Ashaway the other day. Yeah, I had a question actually. Alana, I was wondering if you could talk about the forest monitoring program. I'm currently working on a forest stewardship program for the Northwoods Forest next to URI. And I was just wondering if that was related.
That's very interesting. I'm glad that you mentioned that. So it's part of the Forest Ecosystem Monitoring Cooperative, which most of the group is pretty familiar with. That's a Forest Service UVM program, region-based, really just looking at forest ecosystem health. It's been in some form in practice in Vermont and other northern states for quite a bit longer, but last year was actually the first year that Rhode Island entered the cooperative, and the Woodland Partnership was the great stand-in committee for that. So part of one of the regional goals of the FEMC is to establish these statewide, or actually region-wide, forest health monitoring plots. So they would be long-term plots to follow, general forest health. There are the FIA analysis, but they're, I think FEMC's goal was just to really look more wholly at forest health and changes. And so in Rhode Island, they were looking to propose 7 plots representing the most abundant forest types that we have in Rhode Island. So they wanted to utilize older plots because of having historical data, so old FIA plots. There aren't that many that were retired in Rhode Island. There were a few, and I've been having issues a few of them don't really have public access. But I've also been tasked to find 2 more plots that could be used for this forest health monitoring venture, and especially with that white oak, red oak, hickory forest types. So the Northwoods, I actually was curious about what the long-term prospect of that area is, because I know there's always talk about what's going to happen to it. I don't know if you have any input.
Another parking lot, maybe?
Yeah.
Alana, are you working with Paul Rickard over at DFE on this forest health monitoring stuff?
Yes, yeah, working closely, mostly with Nancy Stairs, but definitely Paul, where he has input, because I know he'd established some white pine plots, which I don't know how much follow-up they had gotten, but back in 2018 he'd been looking for white pine plots, and actually we incorporated that one into our FEMC forest health monitoring plot network.
Hey Patrick, is your work there, is that part of one of your courses at URI, forest management class?
Yeah, no, so the provost actually came to the MESM program asking for a couple of MESM students to put together some sort of stewardship plan, because that's the thing, there hasn't been a long-term plan for the forest for a while. And there have been talks, you know, every couple of years for development, you know, some people have been considering trying to turn it into a parking lot. There have been plans to reroute Route 138 actually through the forest. So the provost wanted to create the stewardship plan to sort of stop those sorts of conversations from happening. So we have a couple of plans to put up like an official sign there, improve some of the hiking trails, that sort of thing. So yeah.
Because from the forestry perspective, that woodlot has been cruised over and over again with the forest management class from between Tom Dupree and Chris Modisette, and probably dating before that. I don't know if you've got access to the information that they used to generate with their classes, but they've done a lot of work in there. And like I said, it's probably just historical stuff, something sitting in a file cabinet someplace. But
yeah, I'm sure it's out there. I personally don't have access to it, but for the historical preference or historical context of the forest, Dean, his name is escaping me, but he actually came into one of our meetings recently. But he's been with the university for a while, and he has, you know, lots of knowledge on, you know, previous plans and whatnot. So yeah.
Maybe the historical student studies can be part of Alana's data rescue in the coming year. The other thing is Nancy Carricker, who's on our board, has been agitating for a BioBlitz in Northwoods to try to raise the profile of it, which would be really cool, especially if we could include the campus to get, and then some turf fields to get some grasslands. It'd be really cool. Whitehorn Brook, it could be cool.
Patrick, the Academics for Land Protection in New England network did a webinar on university forests, their state different uses, case for protection, and so forth. Many of them most of them are larger than the Northwoods, but would happy to try to get you a link to the webinar recording if you're curious.
Oh yeah, great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Patrick. I'm interested to hear, the outcome and the planning for that parcel. And I could also drop you an email with a little bit more information about FEMC and the Sprint Project Venture to keep in mind for our data rescue that we're trying to do with that. And maybe you might be able to hook me up with somebody who has historical data.
Yeah, great, thanks, please.
All right, we'll go over to Lou, back to urban forestry.
All right, a couple updates. Our Energy Saving Trees program is coming back with in-person pickups this spring. We have an anticipated date for the website to go live for reservations on April 5th. And that's at arborday.org/RIDEM. And we're going to have 4 pickup dates. It's going to be the first 4 Saturdays of May. And that's going to be at Richmond Elementary School, Colt State Park, the Rhode Island State Park headquarters in North Kingstown, and then at the Tree Council over in Johnston. And then we are going back to having a spring Arbor Day celebration this year. April 30th, it's going to be in East Providence at North Hull Park, and that is going to be at 10:30 on April 30th. That is all.
Thanks. Yep. Good. TJ, anything else you would like to provide an update on?
No, so I guess the only other update is to thank everyone who submitted information to the group solutions folks that are working with us in Fish and Wildlife on our new, I don't know what you call it, but program review of what we do at state lands and Fish and Wildlife. And things are going well with them. Actually, they're coming up to the state next month It's going to be an internal thing, but they're just visiting us for a couple of days to tour some of the areas that they haven't been able to see. You know, everything's been virtual, obviously, but we're looking forward to that. And reports should be out in this. We should be getting a draft of their report prior to their meeting in April, and then I assume things are going to go public sometime before summer, similar to the state parks report that was done. I guess that was like 2 years ago now. So things are moving with that. And apart from that, that's about it.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
I'll move on over to Scott.
Thanks. I just actually, while folks were talking, I just got a text from John Campanini, and as you know, John hasn't been able to come to some of our meetings recently. His wife has had some health issues. There's other things going on in his personal life, but he's been really behind the scenes advocating for the Forest Conservation Act. John was the person who got us the Senate sponsor, Frank Ciccone. For those of you who don't know Senator Ciccone, he's really a key player in the Senate. He's a boyhood personal friend of the Senate president. So he has personally assured John after the hearing yesterday that the Forest Conservation Act is going to get voted out of Senate Agriculture and Environment Committee. And that's a real positive sign. If it gets voted out, that means that the powers that be think the bill is worthy, and it's very likely to go to the full Senate. Now the issue is getting it through the House. So I think big vote of thanks goes to John for using his political connections to help us with this. That's really huge. And that's really where I've been spending most of my time, trying to get this bill moving forward. And as you know, the webinar that we had yesterday, and I'll be sure to send that link around to everybody because I think you're really going to enjoy Frank Lowenstein's presentation.
Thanks, Scott, for that update. Let's see. Let's go over to Cindy.
Hi, everyone. I'm back again. I got kicked off the other call. It was for SPROs only, so that's the State Plant Health Organ officer. So that's not me. So the CAPS update is that we are securing sites for our 2021 forest survey. So this year we're doing pine, spruce, and oak. One thing I picked up, David said that there are 100 views on the YouTube thing. I actually got an email earlier this week from somebody who watched the YouTube video and saw my introduction about the CAPS program, I think last meeting, and offered some land. So it was through the Burrillville Conservation Commission, and his name is Rich Dion, and I think some of you might know who he is. But he said that I could trap up there, and it sounds like a good spot because I don't really have anything in the northwest corner. And then when I was reviewing our map that's on the PowerPoint presentation today, I noticed with that high risk grid, the 1 kilometer grids that Alana had in that risk management section, the northwest corner seems to be pretty dark in color as a high risk area. So I think it's a good spot for me to kind of just put my traps and check out. So I'm moving, I had 3 sites in Gloucester, so I'm just gonna take one of those sites down and move another one up to Burrillville. But other than that, I think most of our sites are pretty secured and the whole state's pretty covered this year. So that was like an exciting tidbit related to our group. So I guess the people who are watching are paying attention, so that's good. And we have some interns lined up and we're hoping to start in May. Thank you.
Good. Thanks, Cindy. Let's go to Mark Tremblay.
RIFCO is, well, we just had a winter workshop co-sponsored with the conservation districts and NRCS. And I don't know if I ever heard from Molly Allard, not you, Molly. Just how many people we had on
I
that.
have 9 site visits next week
Oh, well, that worked
for
out.
applications. So
Wow.
I think it was successful.
So we must have had 30 or 40 people on there at least for the workshop. We had a 5-minute video that Dick went on his property, and the Fortunes chipped in. I think Bill Fortune, you couldn't ask for a better plug for NRCS programs there, huh, Kate? He really gave a glowing review. So yeah, maybe that helped. I don't know, but yeah, it was a good workshop. Coming up, we're planning on having Kate out at our woodlot in the end of May for Forestry for the Birds program, for our spring program for woodlot owners. And Kate, I know maybe you have an update on other workshops associated with that program for the foresters, maybe, or something. I don't know, but
Not
anyway,
quite yet. I'm
not
working
quite
on
yet.
it.
Okay. So yeah, if anybody has not received their 30th anniversary Rifco mug, a fine specimen of a mug, I must say. You know, I still have a box of them out there available. Send me an email if you'd like one.
Great.
They're not
Thank you.
free, but you know, it's for a nominal donation.
Great coffee from the New England SAF mug with one hand and
Yeah, that's right.
on the other.
They look pretty similar, don't they? I got my SAF one, 100th anniversary meeting of the New England Society of American Foresters, and the Rifco one.
Nice.
Thanks.
Over to Paul.
We're working on a program with conservation districts on small scale forestry, which will be April 5th. We're also getting back into another round of forest energy grants, and we'll have a workshop on April 8th, May 12th, and applications will be due June 18th. Our Enviathon will be going on May 21st, and we'll be doing a virtual coverts workshop on May 22nd. We're presently trying to line up speakers for another geothermal workshop, mostly on climate batteries, things along that line. And we had just received a grant from Rural Development, partnering with NSAVE, and we'll basically be doing outreach to farms, rural small businesses, enrolling applicants, completing renewable energy assessments, and assisting with identifying projects and financing. So that's what we're looking at, trying to target 26 farms or businesses.
Sounds like a busy season of events.
Yes.
Stuff. I'll go over to Fern. What's happening in forest stewardship, Fern?
I actually don't have any new updates for stewardship.
We'll move over to Kate then. I bet she's got some updates.
Sure. Forestry for the Birds. Mark, thanks for scheduling the first workshop. I imagine the other 2 landowner workshops will be later in the June area of the calendar. I need to work on scheduling those, and also the TSP training and the training for natural resources professionals. So stay tuned for info on that. I talked to Greg Cassidy last week, and he mentioned that he will be retiring. Right. So what?
No,
Yeah.
Time travels very fast, because I remember when he just started.
Yes. So I guess we'll all stay tuned on who will be taking over Legacy. I have we've been going back and forth to make sure we're on the same page with the landowners that are currently moving forward and whatever stages they're going through in terms of appraisals and surveys and whatnot. for the project that was funded. And he is still looking for additional landowners and interest in the Scituate Reservoir watershed. So I'll be working on that with Rich Blodgett a little bit, following up with some of our previous applicants and getting some new ones, hopefully. Southern New England Heritage Forest, that's moving forward, both in terms of implementation, collecting applications for folks who have an Audubon bird plan, and signing contracts, the 2021 contracts for landowners who are going to be getting their Audubon bird plan this year. And I'm helping Christopher a little bit with the rollout of implementation in Massachusetts, which has been interesting. All the states are sort of doing it a little differently. And we've got some planning deadlines coming up at NRCS, so everything's about to get a little crazy. And as I mentioned, we have 9 applications from Mark's workshop and then another few for implementation. So next week I'm going to be running around, which is great news, but it's a little bit of a crazy time of year. And I think that's probably it. I don't know. There's always something I'm forgetting. Land and Water Summits tomorrow and Saturday. That should be interesting. Hopefully we hear back on the RCPP application soon. Haven't heard anything. It's at National, and that's it.
Great. Thank you, Kate. Certainly you're working on a lot, as always. All right, so my updates. So we're wearing my sweet birch hat. I've continue to work on the team on the the oak resiliency project, the online oak resiliency assessment tool is it's gotten a little more complex than was first proposed, since the Northern Institute for Applied Climate Sciences and the FEMC have gotten involved, and they see its future application to other ecosystems and parts of the country. But it's going to help make the tool better. I think it will be of interest to a number of you. We're particularly we're out doing work on properties, visiting new properties. But there will be an online virtual workshop for an introduction to it and using it. That's sort of now slated for the late spring, early summer, maybe late May or June. So we'll let you know when the date is as that comes into focus. And then switching to my URI hat, needs to say that all partners, including Rhode Island DEM and UConn, were on board with moving ahead with the proposal to include a Rhode Island site on the Decopit Preserve in Richmond, Rhode Island, in the adaptive silviculture for climate change project that's in the early stages in Connecticut, the Yukon Forest, and the Mohegan State Forest. So we're now submitting the McIntyre Stennis grant proposal, and we'll keep you posted on what comes of that. But part of it would be some outreach to foresters and allied professionals on incorporating climate adaptive forestry practices, and then also for landowners and land trusts as well, in a somewhat similar fashion to the way foresters for the birds has done for those two audiences in Rhode Island. And that's what I've got now. Looking ahead to next month, I think we're going to hear some more from Alana, but we're going to focus on the Forest Ecosystem Monitoring Collaborative and the additional energy that they're putting into Southern New England now on the Sprint project and other updates that those of you who have been more closely involved with that can report. So the date for that will be Thursday, April 15th at the usual time on Zoom. Anybody else have any other announcements, questions, or things they'd like to bring up with the group now? All right. Well, thanks so much for joining this afternoon. You'll be well, and we'll be in touch and see you next month. Thank you.
Bye, all.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.
Bye. Thanks for listening early.